Hello, and welcome to More to the Story with Molly White, where we talk about what the abortion industry doesn't want you to know. And I'm very happy that you joined me again today. And this is actually part two of a interview we had with a special guest, which I will talk to you about it in just a few minutes. Before I do, we're just going to give a shout out to our show sponsor, Dr. Stephen Hotze with the Hotze Health and Wellness Center. We really appreciate their sponsorship. And boy, if you want to stay healthy, that's the place you need to go. And I would like to now just bring in my special co-host, Mary Browning, to talk to you a little bit about our show.
Hi, thank you, Molly. And we are talking about a sensitive topic today. So you may want to be careful. If you have young people that are listening, you may want to listen in a way that they can't hear. And also, if you find yourself being triggered, having an emotional response to what's being discussed today, please know that there is help. You may be invited into another level of healing, and you can find resources for that at the H3 helpline, 866-721-7881, or log on to Operation Outcry, and you'll find healing resources there as well. Thank you, Molly.
Well, thank you, Mary. And this is part two of our interview with our special guest, Kelly Lester. And part one, she really talked about how trauma can lead to the trauma of abortion and even multiple abortions, and how that impacted her life. And then how God came in and saved, delivered, and healed her. And part two is we're going to talk about how her life turned after her second abortion. So, Kelly, welcome back to the show. We're very happy that you're joining us again.
Thank you. Thanks. I'm glad to be back.
Awesome. And, the time flies by so fast that we wanted to make sure that, our audience had an opportunity to listen to your whole story, because it just shows you the depths of where our pain can take us and what we would do, and then how God can bring us out of that and use us even better, for his kingdom. So you had mentioned, that your chemical abortion was very traumatizing. And then that kind of there was a door open for you, and so please just kind of come in and tell us about that.
Yeah, after my second abortion, I continued running drugs, selling drugs, using drugs, drinking excessively, but my life definitely took a darker turn even than that. Worse, I was seeing friends OD, and the quote unquote fun of that had kind of worn off, and selling drugs out the back. And I decided, you know what? I'm tired of this chaotic life. I'm tired of all the craziness. I want to get a good job, and I want to settle down and turn my life around. And I love to help people. I was always kind of a caretaker. Even, in those drug days, I was kind of like the mom, making sure people were okay, making sure people had eaten, that kind of thing. And so I went to my newspaper, because that was, what we would do at that time, and looked for a job, and saw that a women's clinic was hiring for a receptionist. And I didn't have a ton of job experience. I figured a receptionist is something that I could do. And that sounds like a doctor's office. That could be a great start for me. And so I went and put the address in MapQuest and got the directions and followed the directions and pulled into the parking lot of the facility where I'd had my 2 abortions. And pulled in and sat in the car and had to decide whether or not I was going to go in. And people ask me, Kelly, why would you possibly work there? You talk about the trauma of the first abortion. You talk about the trauma of the second abortion. Why would you work someplace where that had happened? And the reality is that I assumed I must have been the only one that had that experience, that I was the only person that it was that traumatic. Surely we would hear about how traumatic abortion was. If other people had bled for 48 hours, surely there would be people talking about how awful this is and how terrible this is and how traumatic it is. And I'd never heard anything about it. And so I thought, you know what? Well, this must be my punishment. My experience must have been my punishment from God, basically, for choosing this option. And I'm like, but this is a decent job. And they did help me when I was in trouble. And so let me go in and see what they have to say. And I walked in and got hired on the spot because they remembered me. And
Wow.
they said, you're with our cause. You believe in our cause. We'll hire you. And I got hired as the receptionist. And this was over 20 years ago. And I was making $18 an hour, which 20 years ago as a receptionist was incredible money.
Yeah.
Now it's very good money, but 20 years ago, that would have been incredible money. And so that led me to do things that I probably would not have done had they not been paying me that kind of money.
Right. And so when they were so, eager to hire you on the spot, I'm wondering if they had other women come to them after their abortions, and recognizing that it's trauma, it's part of the justification or whatever. I wonder if they knew anything and had any clue about the trauma that would lead women to get involved in the industry.
Yeah, I know that. I don't know about the staff necessarily. I mean, some of the staff that I worked with, they had gotten abortions after being on staff there. No, I don't know about beforehand, but I know for sure afterwards they had, because it was kind of like a running joke. Like nobody was safe, use protection. Everybody was promiscuous. And it was like, we don't need to worry about it because we can just take care of it. You know what I mean? It was like that kind of an attitude. But I know for sure that many of the escorts were women that had abortions. And so they came back and that was how they were serving.
Yeah. And to me, it's like justification and rationalization.
Yes, for sure.
If I did this, it was okay for me. It's okay for others. And it's really like misery loves company. If you want to sum it all up, it's like, if it's okay for me, even though it wasn't, we're going to help other women. So maybe I don't even feel alone in my suffering or alone in my feelings.
Right.
So that's kind of what I've kind of discovered in the past. And so you worked there, and what was your mindset when you took the job?
Well, I went there wanting to help people. Wanting to help women like who were confused and didn't know what to do and maybe had life plans that this was going to interrupt. And I really thought that that's what we did. And I recognized very quickly what we were really doing. And that happened, honestly, my second day of work. And that was because they came to me and they said, Kelly, as the receptionist, part of your job is the reception area, which makes sense. I mean, you would take the magazines and go through the magazines, and anywhere there was a baby or a happy couple or an engagement ring or a minivan or diapers or anything that might cue a maternal instinct in her, we would cut those pictures out.
Wow.
We had a TV in the room that looked like it was playing live TV, but it was actually a videotape that had removed any commercials that would be diapers or babies or anything that might cue that in her.
Wow.
When the guys in Virginia at that time, there was a 24-hour appointment. A lot of times they would bring their boyfriend or their husband or their partner with them to that first appointment. And all of the ladies would sit in the reception area with their boyfriends to the back for their consultation, where they would meet with their counselor. They would watch a 3-minute video together, and then one by one, they would go in to their payment options, not adoption, thing else, but this is what you owe. How are you going to pay for it? Do you want sedation? Do you not want sedation? And so while the women were back doing that, we would turn the heat extremely hot in the waiting room or the air conditioning extremely cold so that the guys would get up and leave and go out to their cars.
Wow.
And the girls would come out and the nurse would say to them, see, if he won't even support you for this appointment, what makes you think he'll support you for a child?
Wow.
Because we knew the power of their voice. And we knew that if we could separate them and if we could drive a wedge in between them, that would be effective. And I think about a year ago, I was speaking at an event and an older man came up to me and he said, you know what? About 25, 30 years ago, I was stationed in Virginia And I took my girlfriend to an abortion facility. Which one did you work at? And I told him, and he said it was that facility. And I remember getting up and leaving her and going out to my car. And I've always hated myself for leaving her in there.
Wow.
I
And
thought, wow.
wow. And Kelly, I had a similar experience when I had my first abortion. You know, I don't know if it was a friend that took me. I don't remember if he came in with me or stayed out in the car, but they hurried me back because I was unsure of myself. I was asking too many questions, and so they hurried me in the back, and I went through all that process, but I didn't go out the front door. They escorted me out in the back alley where all the trash cans were dumped, the dumpsters and all of that. So yeah, they didn't even take us back out the front door. So
Which was very typical for us also, because the cars, if you came out the front door, you would have to walk across the parking lot. The back door, cars could pull right up to the back door. And so the girl could easily get from the back door to the car. And usually they were so heavily sedated, they couldn't really walk. And so we didn't want them stumbling out the front door, falling in the parking lot. Somebody seeing that. So we would take them out the back.
Mine was walk around the whole big building to the front parking lot. Of course, I wasn't sedated, but yeah, I was just thinking they do that so that you don't traumatize the women who are in the waiting room.
Yes.
And then you're no longer their problem, out the back door, goodbye, and
right. No, that's
and Kelly, I have a question, because
Yes.
we've had an earlier conversation, and one of the things that happened, there was something else that happened when the women came in, wasn't there? Can you tell our listeners about that?
Yeah. So the other part of my job was when the woman would come in, I would, give her paperwork. I would take the first thing I would do. She'd come in, I'd take her ID and I would take her money. And then I would hand her her paperwork, and I would hand her Valium and a cup of water. And she would take the Valium right in front of me, give me back the cups, and then sit down to fill out her paperwork, which first off completely violates informed consent. And then she would fill out the paperwork. And there were times where those women would change their mind and decide, hey, I don't want to do this anymore. And so she would come up to me and tell me that. And I would say, okay, I need you to sit down. I need the nurse to come talk to you. And the nurse would come out and tell her, by law in the state of Virginia, because you have taken a medication, we need to keep you here for 2 hours to monitor side effects. And so you need to sit here. And then the nurse would leave her. She would come back out. Now, mind you, the Valium has kicked in, and tell this young woman, look, you've got everything you need. You've got your money. You've got everything straight. Let's go ahead and just take care of this for you. And in all the time I was there, I do not remember a single woman ever saying no. Wow. Every single time they were convinced. What's interesting about that, on the flip side, is that my other part of the job was the recovery room. Now, I was not a doctor. I was not a nurse. I was a drug dealer, but I knew nothing about medicine. I was the one that these women, who the overwhelming majority did the sedation, because it was only $25. And we wanted them to do the sedation because it protected us, quite honestly. And these women would take the sedation, which was a mixture of like fentanyl. It's a mixture of drugs like fentanyl. Again, if you've ever done a colonoscopy or had a wisdom tooth, it's that same kind of sedation. So it's a very heavy sedation. They would take the sedation. Within 5 minutes, the doctor would come in, do the procedure, which took a total of 5 minutes. So we're now at 10 minutes. The women would come to the recovery room, and at 20 minutes, it was my job to bring them cookies, juice, their birth control if they had it, their clothes, and then release them. So these women who had taken a Valium, we told they need to sit there for 2 hours so we could monitor them. But these women who have had this 20 minutes later, we are pushing them out the back door and into their car.
Wow.
And the reason that we loved that sedation was because, and this was why I left the abortion industry, because when women were perforated and hemorrhaging all over the floor because of a perforated uterus or bowel or cervix, we would take them back to the procedure room and then stop the bleeding, basically. I'm not going to say fix what had happened, because we never fixed it. We just stopped the bleeding. And then those women, we would be telling them what had happened to them.
Wow.
And giving them no instructions for follow-up care, giving them no instructions for going and talking to an OBGYN. We never asked any women to come back in for a follow-up appointment because that was a free appointment that we didn't make any money on. And we didn't want to know that there were any complications because then we would have to write them in a chart. And so we didn't tell them anything. And that is what caused me to leave the abortion. All the manipulation that was happening in the front. I saw the practices, pre-filled out prescription pads and pre-filled out files. And when the inspector would come in, we would prepare everything so they knew what they were coming into and still would fail these inspections. I saw the women hemorrhaging. It happened so often that I actually looked at my own file because I was one of those women.
Wow.
I the way that the nurses and the doctors spoke about these women. And I thought, wow, I wonder, did they speak to me like that? And I saw all of that. And I did not, while I thought that abortion was still okay, which I know is so crazy, but when you're in that mindset, I did not think that it was okay that we were ruining these women's chance to ever become pregnant or ever become a mother. And so that for me was like the thing that I was like, I have to be done with this. And so I left the abortion industry.
Wow. And this is just such blatant medical malpractice and false and deceptive trade practices of the abortion industry. And with the millions of abortions that happen, every year, they've got to be stopped because they haven't changed. They haven't cleaned up their act. They haven't, miraculously become a upright, honest medical practice. It's still back alley. It's just a legal back alley in some states, but it's just appalling that they're abusing women in the name of women's rights.
Yes.
Right. Yeah. So I now work for an organization, none. And I want to tell you about that. But before that, I want to tell you, because people always ask me about how are you now pro-life? Because after that experience, I didn't become pro-life. I continued to have 2 more abortions after that because of the trauma that I'd experienced, and I didn't have healing, and I continued to add trauma. And so I went to the same coping mechanisms. And I was saved, and I'd tell that in the previous one. So if you want to find out how
that's right. Listen to the first.
Listen. Well,
I turned my life and slowly, filling myself with the Word of God, surrounding with women who are these women that I, wanted to be like. And slowly over time, I began to value my own life. And there, it was kind of a process where I was like, well, I wouldn't have an abortion, but, I understand why somebody else would. And it became slower and slower. And then I got pregnant with my son, and I saw his ultrasound and realized, oh my goodness, I had an abortion at that stage. And then later on, I saw his ultrasound. I said, oh my goodness, I had an abortion at that stage. And throughout his pregnancy, I'm thinking, I've aborted babies at those stages. Oh my gosh, how could I ever do this? And abortion is horrible, and as the truth began to wash me, I began to realize how horrible the abortion industry was. And I started talking about a lot of my life and sharing my story, but I never talked about working in the abortion industry. So I would talk about the abuse. I would talk about, the domestic violence. I would talk about all eating disorders and all homosexuality, all the things I could talk about. But working in the abortion industry was the thing that I never spoke about, because the one time I did, somebody looked at me like I had 6 heads. And I'd never met anybody who worked in the abortion industry. And so I just kind of hid that in my pocket and started actually working for a pregnancy center in Fredericksburg called Choices Women's Center, which a little plug for Choices, and really share about that experience. And then in 2019, we could do and show the movie Unplanned.
Oh,
and I didn't know anything about the movie. I didn't know who Abby Johnson was. And I thought, okay, well, this could be cool. And the first night I'm watching it on the screen, and I saw my story on the screen, and I thought, oh my goodness, but I just still kind of put it in my back pocket. You know, I didn't really know what to do. And then that January, I went to the March for Life in DC, and Abby and her team were there, and they had a coffee with quitters, which we call former workers quitters. And I went up to them and said, "Hey, this isn't something I've really told people, but I'm a former worker." And they welcomed me with open arms. And I became a client, and then came on staff with them, and have now been with them for over going on 5 years. And so, you know, that's where we are now.
Amen. And, you know, we've had Abby Johnson on as a guest and really talked about her incredible ministry, and there was none, and how she was, you know, a director of a Planned Parenthood clinic in the town where I actually protested in front of,
Wow.
you know, shared my abortion testimony there. But that's so important for women in the abortion industry and men in the abortion industry to know you can come out of that. And God will heal you. He'll forgive you. He'll restore you, and he will put you in a better place. And so we want to encourage that, and encourage others that, you know, this information is so important. If you know someone who's pregnant and contemplating an abortion, they need to know how the abortion industry operates. You're not.
Yeah. And I want to say, you know, my experience was 20 years ago, but we have over almost 800 workers who have quit and come to, and then there were none. And my experience was not isolated. Abby didn't know that she was going to find that out, but we have recognized that it doesn't matter whether it was 30 years ago or it was 3 days ago, whether it was a big city in Texas at a major Planned Parenthood, or it was a small town in Alabama at a private facility. The experience is the same. The care is the same, which is not very much. The quality of worker is the same. Everything is exactly the same, because abortion is a systemic issue. And so, you know, it's something that we've realized that it is not, like you said, it is not getting any quote unquote safer, which we know abortion is never safe, but it's not gotten any better. The medical care is not any better. It's in fact getting worse and worse. And with chemical abortion, it's even getting worse.
And so I always thought, now how come all these abortion industries and these abortion businesses all operate the same? Is there a network? Is there, you know, how do they, you know, have the same kind of operating procedures? And like you said, they could be a small private abortion clinic or a major one, you know, and I'm thinking, well, how do they all know and do the same kind of practices?
Yeah, it's actually a very close-knit community. They are, I mean, look at Planned Parenthood. If you go to one Planned Parenthood or go to another, they are very similar. They have the same messaging. They have the same, I mean, everything. Now, it may look a little bit different, but it's very, very similar. And so it is a unified front. They are very unified in everything that they do, because they have one mission and one mission. They don't have to worry about the mom. They don't have to worry about the baby. They don't have to worry about the dad. They don't have to worry about care. They have to get that woman in the stirrups, and that is all they are focused on. And so that's what they do. Yeah.
Yep. And that's what every clinic does. Well, we're running out of time. Is there anything else you would like to mention or say to our audience before we have to go?
Before you go there, Kelly, could I just say, what you're telling us about the abortion industry really underscores for me the lack of choice, the manipulation, the coercion, the intentionality of that manipulation. So I just wanted to mention that for our listeners. So now I'd love to hear what you have to say.
Thank you.
Yeah, you know, I 100% agree with that. That was what we were told, was that if a woman contacted us, we needed to assume that abortion was her best option and remove any obstacle to that decision. But I want to say, for listeners that deal with abortion workers, you are dealing with women created in the image of God, and they do not know it yet, but that's what you're there for. And so look at them as you would your mom or your sister, even though they're probably not being kind to you, because if God will save them, which if he can save me, he can save this platform that they can have for life can be so powerful. So, and just be Jesus to them in any way.
Absolutely,
can.
because we've all sinned and fallen short of the glory of God, and we've all been lost. And so it's our responsibility as a believer to be the light of Christ, to love people out of their sin and into the arms of Jesus. So thank you, Kelly, for joining us. It was amazing and so informative. And we hope you will take this information and become more educated if you're not, and then share this information with as many people as possible. Like the link, make a comment on it, and share it with all of your networks. So thank you, Mary. Thank you, Kelly. And thank you
Thank
for
you.
joining us on More to the Story of Molly White. See you next time. Bye-bye.